Ladies and gentlemen, the CEO of New Zealand Ski, Mr. Paul Anderson. Paul, welcome to the show. Welcome to become your own superhero.
Thanks, Laban. It's great to be talking with you.
Thank you very, very much for taking the time to come and share with us today. Hopefully what will be some very inspirational advice, guidance, whatever you want to call it. But before we get stuck into that side of things, Paul, can you tell us a little bit about Paul Anderson, the man, and your involvement with New Zealand Ski?
Yeah, sure thing. Feel a little bit uncomfortable, I guess, about the prospect of providing inspiration. I'm really a kind of a I'll lead from the front kind of person. We've just been through a really busy time on our mountains for the last couple of weeks, and I find that the best thing I can do is get up there and just muck in with the team wherever I can. That's what really spins my wheels. And I found that when I started this role, I actually said in the interview, what kind of CEO are you looking for? You're looking for someone who'll sit in an office and spit out plans and numbers, or do you want someone who holds the stop-go sign on a snowy day? And the board, being a family business, they want it all. So they said, we'll have both, thanks. I said, great, well, that works for me. So yeah, look, a little bit about me, maybe a little bit about my background. If I start with my professional background, then I'll move maybe into my personal background. Pretty diverse. I'm a trained accountant, but don't judge me, because one of the best compliments I've got in my career was I was once head of commercial and sales, commercial and finance in Spark, which is a big telecommunications.
Telecom, yeah.
Yeah, telecom back in the day. And one of the biggest cowboys on our sales team said to me, you're the most right-brain accountant I've ever met. And I said to him, well, Warren, I'll take that as a big compliment. Thank you very much. So yeah, long story short, I went to university in Christchurch. That was my hometown. Studied commerce, marketing and accounting, majoring more on the accounting side. And I always saw that as a bit of a fallback option. But it provided me with a really good background to kind of snaffle the roles that I was interested in. When I got through, kind of halfway through my second year at university, I realized that those were the grades that were going to get me a job. And unfortunately, I was having a pretty good time. And while I was passing everything, the grades weren't stellar. So in my third year, I decided to actually stay, do a master's degree and knuckle down and get some decent grades. Because they were back in the day where a lot of employers said, don't worry about your grades, it's all about the person. And I was kind of like, yeah, bullshit, because I didn't get any of those jobs I wanted to get. So that was the first learning. There's no substitute for good hard work. And I went back for another 2 years and got a first class honours degree in commerce from Canterbury. And that did open a few doors. So
Well done.
Straight out of university, I went into the New Zealand Treasury graduate program. Still in a bit of denial. I kind of thought, I think they made a mistake, because I'm in here with all these guys who are, and women who are absolute rocket scientists. But I guess the thing that I did maybe a little bit differently in that role was I always took pride in explaining things in really simple terms. And when you're briefing ministers, that becomes quite valued, because they're not necessarily accountants or economists. So you can say it in really plain English for them. It makes it easier for them to do their jobs and then communicate that on to the public. So anyway, 4 years there, then did the classic Kiwi Aussie thing, went up to London, went into a bank up there, and again was brutally honest in my interviews. I remember the guy at Michael Page Finance, I think it was back in the day, said to me, you're going for this banking job, what do you know about banking? And I said, absolutely nothing. And he said to me, why would I give you the job? And I said, well, you know, I work hard and I think I learn quite quickly. So I secured a role at NatWest GFM, which back then was the biggest sterling trader in the world.
Wow.
And I was working with another Kiwi contractor on a project implementing a new FX dealing system, which, as I said, I knew nothing about. But Craig and I did that job. After 6 months, the project director asked us to go and do the implementations in New York, Hong Kong, Tokyo, and Singapore, which wasn't a bad gig for a 27-year-old coming out of London.
Wow.
I had to tell my my then girlfriend, who was actually, you know, sorry, she was my fiance at the time, now my wife.
Oh, you got me.
See you later. I'm off for a couple of months doing this thing. They were good times, and then we came back to New Zealand, and that was when I went into Spark, or it was Telecom in the day, and was there when they bought an IT company called Genii, and I was working in corporate finance, and then that's when I made a big career call, which was I'd done finance roles my whole career, and I wanted to broaden myself out. So I knew that you kind of start to hit this top where you're going, okay, the next step up is kind of financial controller / CFO. But I thought I wanted to learn more about the business. So that's when I went into this sales team, and I went in as head of commercial and finance. So I was their beanie, if you like, but far more sales focused, and just loved it. You know, I remember the first week I was in that team, and they were having their sales conference. And I don't know whether you've ever been to a sales conference, but it's a lot of drinking, a lot of partying, and a lot of slapping each other on the back and telling each other what a great job you've done.
Yep.
And I remember after the first night, I phoned my wife and I said, these people are out of control. But what I saw in them was just so much passion for our business. You know, they were out there talking to customers every day, selling our products, solving customers' problems, and they were just driven by this passion. Yes, you might say some of them were coin driven because a lot of them were on big incentive plans, but I loved it. I just loved the emotion and that side of the way they operated. From there, I took another sideways step into a purely operational role. So really breaking out of the finance, staying at the same level, moved back to Christchurch, which is my hometown.
Shout out Christchurch.
Yeah, shout out Christchurch. And I went into a role there called Head of Retail Data Provisioning, which sounds like as a pretty dry role. It was a team who were responsible for doing all the provisioning of broadband and managed data solutions for telecoms customers and GI's customers in New Zealand. About 200 people in Christchurch and Auckland. And what I learned there was that you don't actually need to understand what people do. You just need to be able to ask the right questions and kind of set them free to do a great job. I remember I'd been in there about 12 months, and we had a leadership conference, and Mark Ratcliffe, who later became CEO of Chorus here, did a bit of a shout out to some of the people who he was just trying to use examples of good leadership, and to my surprise, I was one of the ones. And what had really happened there is they'd seen this big turnaround in the productivity of the retail data provisioning team. And the only way I could describe it was I said, well, what I've tried not to do is get in these guys' way, because when I went into that role and went around that team and talked to them about what they all did, I actually said to them, I remember, because I'd come out of that sales role, and I said, you guys deal with our customers more than the sales team do. Do you know that? And they're like, what? Really? And I said, yeah, you're almost embedded in their IT teams. You're working with them every second of your day. And so what I did again was just got out of their way, asked them what they needed to do their jobs better. Did your classic kind of, if you like, the geeky way to say it is the Lean Six Sigma approach of how do we make your processes better, but we called it past the customer. So how do we deliver what the customer wants faster, and just set them free to do their thing. So that was a really, really good learning for me, that, you know, I didn't really need to understand what they did, because they were in configuring the core of the system and dispatching patch contractor. Yeah, exactly. I was like that. You know, I just need to fight your corner, and because you know what you want to do, and you know what you know how you want to do it. So that job was about 1.5 years, and then I, by chance, a role in Christchurch came up, and the role was General Manager Corporate Services for Christchurch City Council, which is the municipality in Christchurch. That role appealed to me because it was basically the CFO, but then it had property, IT, and procurement on top of that. So a really broad role. Again, didn't think I had much of a chance of getting it. And funnily enough, my wife was actually working at Christchurch City Council at the time as a public affairs manager. And I said to her, well, you know, should I have a go at this role? And she was like, it'd be kind of funny working with the same place, but yeah, you probably won't get it, so why not? So I did get it. And I was kind of lucky going into that. I was lucky going into that role because, and I say lucky because the guy who was CEO at the time, this guy by the name of Tony Marriott, and Tony had done that role before, and I guess whatever he saw in me, he knew that any of the experience or skills I didn't have, he could help me with. And I asked him about 12 months in, well, why did you choose me? And he just said, look, I just thought I could get on with you. You know, I thought you were smart. I thought I could get on with you. I thought we could work well together, and we did work really well together. That was quite a ride, and I'm sure we'll come back later to talk about the earthquakes, because I was effectively CFO for the Christchurch City Council when the city was decimated by 2 earthquakes in 2010 and 2011. So
well, feel free to get into that, Paul, if you'd like.
Yeah, well, yeah, lots of learnings out of that. You know, I always said my time at Christchurch City Council, which was about 6 years, kind of had 3 parts to it. One was climbing this enormous learning curve where I'd never done property before, so I was working with a property team trying to understand what made them tick. The finance side I knew a little bit better, but obviously it was on a grander scale than I'd seen before, and it also had tax or rates, because we charge rates, and the whole political element where my treasury background was really useful for communicating well with our councillors. So the first part was climbing that learning curve. The second part was the earthquakes, or the immediate response to the earthquakes, which was, it was quite something, because everyone in Christchurch was dealing with their own personal situations as well as dealing with their work situations. And
just to cut you off there, Paul, just to cut you off there. So just for the listener, can you just tell us what happened in Christchurch in 2011?
Sure. So September 2010 was the first earthquake, and that was I believe a 7.1.
And very shallow, very shallow.
Very shallow, yeah. So I remember my wife and I, we were actually, I think it was a Friday night, because the Saturday morning we were getting up and driving to Wanaka for a week skiing. And, the ground shook, and my genius suggestion at 4:37 lying in bed was it's an earthquake, which we were pretty conscious of. That earthquake actually didn't do that much damage to Christchurch. I mean, it's all relative. It happened in the middle of the night. I believe there was 1, maybe 2 people killed from falling masonry, and then there were a few buildings that were weakened and so on. So we went into an emergency response phase. We thought it was bad. until the February earthquake happened. The February earthquake was actually a lesser on the Richter scale, but it was, as you said, very shallow, and it was also a sideways shake, so quite a different earthquake. I remember, I was probably in denial about the fact that we could possibly have another earthquake, because we used to stand our ironing board up in our laundry, right? And I remember saying about 2 months after the September earthquake to my wife, can we, she had laid it down, right? Because she thought there was going to be another earthquake. And I said, can we just put that back to how it was? Because what city of this size ever has 2 earthquakes in close proximity? Well, she was right, I was wrong, of course. So that February one was was horrific. I was at council building when it hit. There was extensive damage, inside the building. The building, we were in a pillar and beam building that swayed a lot. The lights fell down. The linings came off the walls. Desks were thrown around. People were, very traumatized. I was just finishing a council committee actually and talking to one of the councillors, and managed to drag her under the table while the shaking lasted. And then as we exited the building, fortunately our building didn't fall down, but as we exited the building, and you literally had to climb the mound outside the building because the building had shunted the street sideways and created a 4 or 5 metre hill that you had to climb over.
Wow, Jesus!
It became very apparent that we were in a very serious event. So we activated the emergency operations centre, and went. The emergency operations centre was just over the road from our council building and the art gallery, which on the surface looked like the worst building possible to have an emergency operations centre in, because it had a massive glass facade, but glass kind of moves nicely when the ground moves, and we only lost, I think, 1 or 2 panes in that whole facade and the whole time.
Wow.
We started the emergency operations centre up, and then the next year was probably the response phase, and then we went into a recovery phase where we were negotiating with the Crown on who was going to pay for what, and also at the same time leading the city. And probably the most distasteful part of the whole earthquake experience in Christchurch was the politics that came out. Everyone, let's put my rose tinted glasses on, which I'm reasonably good at doing. Everyone was trying to do the right thing, but inevitably egos get in the way.
Mm-hmm.
And we had a lot of people come from government who we needed help from, who kind of overstepped their mandate, in my view. And did things perhaps that weren't best for our community, but in their view were the right things to do, and we can dig through some of that. But yeah, so 2 years after the earthquake, my wife actually saw this job advertised, which is CEO for NZ Ski. I thought, well, I've never thought of working in the ski industry, passionate about skiing, because my wife and I have always skied, and I'm not from a skiing family. I can come back to the family later, but I always loved the outdoors, and so I said to her, well, I'm not a tire kicker, so if I'm going for it, I'm going for it. Are you prepared to move to Queenstown? She went, no, we'll see what happens.
Thought you would have learned a lesson by now.
Exactly. So yeah, I went into that interview, and it's a family business. So NZ Ski is owned by Trojan Holdings, and Trojan is a very diversified business across property, farming, transport and logistics, and tourism. It's owned by a family. The founder is Sir John Davies. Sir John's in his late 70s now, still very active in the business, and just a fantastic guy to work for, because he's very direct. You never wonder what he's thinking, and the decision making is rocket fast compared to when I was in council. But I went into that interview, and it was 45 minutes of chat with the board, mainly with John, and came out of the interview phoned my wife. She said, "How'd you go?" I said, "Look, not really sure." It was kind of like sitting down talking to my father-in-law about life and philosophies and what you like and what you don't like. I said, "I know, we'll see what happens." Put the phone down. Then the recruitment firm rang me and said, "Well, you're the preferred candidate." And that was my first example of how swift the decision-making process was. And John's a really intuitive businessman, and that board had already done their due diligence on me. So it was really a matter of having a chat, seeing if we got on well, and the rest is history. And look, I've loved it. It's a fantastic role. Working in the south of the South Island, you really work on the basis of trust, and it did take a while for me to develop that trust with the family. I certainly feel like I've got it now, 7 years in. I got appointed to the parent company board last year, which I found a real honour.
Congratulations, by the way.
Thank you. It reflects John's wish to work with people that he trusts. He would rather, I think, bring up his key executives and have kind of managing director type positions across his business than bring in more independents, which more independent directors, which would probably you would take that advice from from someone looking at it from a pure governance perspective. But
yeah,
I can tell you I've worked in central government, local government, banking, telecommunications, and now for a family business. And there's no right or wrong in governance. There's just different. And as a CEO or leader in any of those businesses, you really just need to understand or empathize, I guess is the thing, is empathize what drives the people who are making the decision, and respect those values that they're trying to bring into their decision making, whether they're politicians or private business owners, because at the end of the day, they're the ones that have got to make the calls and have got to be accountable for those calls.
Well, it's an extraordinary rise, and it sounds fantastic. Like, especially if you put that on paper. And I suppose that the one thing that I'm curious to know, Paul, is where did you learn all these key values that have held you in such good stead the whole of your life?
I think you learn those everywhere. I've probably learned more for people who have worked for me than the people I've worked for. But you've got to look for those opportunities in every turn. I guess if I go back to the things that shaped me or have shaped me personally, I'm youngest of a family of 8.
Wow.
And
Catholic
family, yeah, good Catholic family from Christchurch. 4 girls, 4 boys. My father passed away when I was 9, and that's probably the single biggest event that's probably shaped who I am. But also, I think having such a diverse family, there's 8 of us spread over 13 years. So I probably saw a lot of things as a kid that a lot of kids don't see, because my brothers and sisters weren't, they were doing things that I wouldn't have seen if I had younger brothers and sisters. So I wasn't naive, but I also grew a real independence and a respect, I think, for different views and different people. And it's something I've had to learn about myself, particularly more recently in this role, where I'm looking across a far more diverse team, spanning everything, operations, marketing, the whole thing. And the fact that, one of the things I often say is not everyone's good at everything. In fact, no one's good at everything. And you've got to be able to work out how you can get the best out of every person, and give them those opportunities to shine. But I think in terms of what shaped me, losing a father at 9, definitely, and then that broad family with lots of different ideas and just the ability to respect different people My mother's obviously been a massive part of my life because looking up to her all my life. She was a nurse, so when Dad died, she had 5 of us still at home.
Wow.
Worked full time for as long as I could remember. Certainly, well after I was at university. Never batted an eyelid. Incredibly stoic. And she just passed away earlier this year. Massive thing for my family.
Wow.
And
Sorry to hear that.
yeah, thank you. The thing she's really left us with is, just I think that independence, that stoicism, that kind of no fuss, no stress way of getting on with things. And ultimately, like when you've got a big family, you're spread out across the world. But she left us as a tighter unit because we all came together to be with her in her final months. So kind of a nice way for her to go, even though we never thought she was going to go, because she was in perfect health right up until the end.
Wow. The thing we spoke about off camera, Paul, is the growing up without a father puts you at odds at really being a functional, contributing member of society compared to someone that grew up, with a functional parent relationship. Was there any point in your life growing up that you were close to veering down a path that maybe you didn't want to go down?
Not really. It's not that it wasn't hard, but I was kind of, I think the respect, my respect for my mother never put me down that path, because she was always working so hard to provide whatever we needed, and we never wanted for anything, but we didn't really know what we didn't have, because we were happy we had a lot of us, and we had things we did together and so on. But going to high school without a father, St Bede's, which is the college I went to in Christchurch, is a real father and son kind of place, and Dad had actually been chairman of the PTA a couple of years before I got there, so he died in the interim, and that was kind of tough. I was probably quite a quiet kid at high school. I always did all right academically, and I did all right sporting wise. So I was kind of an all rounder, but never to a really high level. But I just enjoyed participating. Probably the thing that really that gave me a bit of a blow at high school was I wasn't made a prefect. And I remember Mum being very angry about that, because she said, if your father was around, you would have been made prefect. But for me, I've kind of never been much of a victim. I don't like sitting around going, oh, that wasn't fair. I kind of went, well, so why wasn't I a prefect? Maybe people haven't noticed me. Maybe, for whatever reason, you kind of have to look at yourself and go, what could I have done differently to change that outcome? And that's always been, it's the way I've looked at things, is when things have gone wrong, the best way to look at things is, what could I have done differently? Because that's the only thing I can control, right? Is the things that I've done to lead to that outcome. If I had that time again, what would I do differently that might lead to a different outcome? So it just made me reflect on that, that was it. So growing up without a father at high school, that was tough. But you kind of learn that independence pretty quick, and you learn to look after yourself pretty quick. I was a pretty small kid, so I was the second smallest at St Bede's when I was there in year 9, Form 3. I remember getting bullied by some of the bigger kids, but they only do it once, because once they learn that you're a bit much of a handful, they move on to someone else. So.
Good work. The high school that you went to, for the listeners, is one of the rival schools against the high school that I went to, Christchurch Boys High. And
we usually beat you though, don't we, Laban?
Well, I haven't been keeping too close an eye in the last few years. I think there's half a dozen All Blacks playing in the high school team by the sounds of it. It's pretty extraordinary. They call it the factory, I think, for the production of all the amazing sports stars. But The you know, because I think you're, how old are you, Paul?
I'm 49.
49. So you're just 9 years older than I. And
Yeah.
I think corporal punishment was still in play, I think, when you were at school.
Yep,
Pretty close to
certainly
it.
was. Yeah.
So did you manage to avoid getting a hiding from teachers during
No, I got a couple. No, I mean, it was always ridiculous. It was things that, you get caned for things that, you were on the wrong side of a fence or something like that, and you go, really? And you've kind of didn't cane me for all those other things we did. But yeah, I never had too many difficulties getting a couple of cuts, as the priest used to say. You just took your punishment and moved on. It certainly played to my kind of ideals of getting things over and done with quick and getting out there and not being stuck behind for a detention.
Oh God! Now you're taking me back. I had the pleasure of reconnecting with a teacher that taught me at Middleton Grange, the first school I went
Oh,
to
yeah?
when I
Yeah.
was 6. And during the course of COVID, Paul, I've written my very first book. And the book is about periods of my life. And there was one particular day back in 1986, it was my birthday. And there was a temporary teacher or relief teacher that asked me what I was doing. And, mum and dad weren't together and mum had no money. And I said, look, it's my birthday. And she said, what are you doing? And I said, mum said she's got no money, but she'll make it up to me later on. And as I left school later that day, she ran up to me with an envelope full of money, had $30 in there. And I never had an opportunity to thank her, but in the writing of the book, we launched this manhunt at Middleton Grange trying to find her. And the whole school was going through old records and all this other stuff. And they found this woman, well, they thought they did. And she had passed away and we're like, oh no. But then it wasn't her. And they found this woman who's now a priest out in the outer skirts of Christchurch. And I had the absolute pleasure of ringing her up and reconnecting with her and reading her the chapter of the book. And it was an incredibly humbling experience in my life. And
Nice.
so, yeah. And she remembered me. She didn't remember the incident because she must have
Right.
done it a couple of times. Very frowned upon back then. Like, didn't even tell her husband about it. And I just thought, what a great school memory. For you, Paul, was there any other pivotal moments memory-wise from school or your youth that are worthwhile sharing?
From school, no. I mean, I think from then on, as I said, I went from school into university, reasonably normal university career, apart from the realization that actually there's no substitute for hard work. And once I did knuckle down and got the grades that I could be proud of, that started to open those doors. But then, I guess going into Treasury, the thought of backing yourself, and once I got myself out of this rut of this is a mistake, can't believe I'm here, and it probably took a year, 18 months until I actually believed that I was worthy of being there, and that's because they're pretty brutal at Treasury about ranking. They go, well, you're the top, you're the second, you're the third, and you get 12 analysts or 12, and they also, you come out with a first class honours degree and you go in there as a trainee analyst, so they know how to cut you off at the knees pretty quick. But I was one of the top 2 analysts in my year, and I started to think, actually maybe I'm not that, maybe I've got a few clues, and so it's just about building that confidence slowly. Probably, the experience in London with getting shoulder tapped to go and do that work overseas. And then when I came back to telecom and I got shoulder tapped by a very senior, he was actually group financial controller at the time. I said, I want you to apply for this job because I think you'd be great at it. And I hadn't even thought of it. I still didn't have that aspiration that I could do better and better and better. But he could see it, and I loved working for him. I got the role, and that exposed me to the senior exec of Telecom, and Teresa Gatting, who was then, I think she was one of the youngest female CEOs New Zealand had seen at that time. And she was fabulous to work for. It gave me exposure to a really senior level. But most importantly, working with the Group Financial Controller, Peter Garty, and I went into that role expecting I was going to learn all about corporate finance and all that kind of thing from him. But I didn't learn that. What I learned from him was about taking a genuine interest in your team, because he was fabulous. You know, like I'd go in there and we'd yarn for 45 minutes of an hour meeting about what we did in the weekend, and we'd both ride bikes back then, blah, blah, blah. 15 minutes, nail the work and get on with it. But he was like that with everyone he worked for him. He would know something about them, about their families, and he had a real genuine caring about him. And he got the best out of people. And as I said, I think as leaders, that's what that's what any decent leader should aspire to, is getting the best out of the people. You know, the old Jim Collins adage of getting the right people in the bus. If you believe you've done that, then your best thing to do is get out of their way and let them do their jobs. You don't necessarily need to motivate them, but you need to do everything in your power not to demotivate them or not to put them into demotivating situations. So working for Peter was fabulous for me at that stage of my career, to be able to learn some of that stuff. And the other thing that I think was really important then, two things. One, Teresa had taken over Telecom from its former CEO, Roderick Dean. And Roderick's an absolute legend in New Zealand business. I never worked with Roderick, but as I understand, he's quite command and control, so quite autocratic. And Teresa wanted to bring a more, probably, let's say a more market-led focus to the company rather than an engineering-led approach. And she put her top 100 managers on this journey that we call Breakthrough, which was, I was just lucky. I just squeaked in at that stage to the top 100 in Telecom, and it was fantastic. You know, I was what would I be, 28 then, getting some great exposure to senior execs and getting some training that I was lucky just to squeak into. So, and it wasn't training about, you know, or design or finance or marketing or any of that stuff. It was soft skills, and you know, EQ, and learning about yourself and learning about how the way you behave and the way the impact of your emotions on other people, and just being aware of that. That was huge for me, because at that stage of my career, I went to work and I had a work persona, and I didn't bring my own persona to that job because I thought that was the wrong thing to do. But what I learned through that training was the power of emotion used well. And you know, that's something I've carried with me ever since then. And you know, that doesn't mean just being emotional and throwing tantrums or being deliriously happy, but as you know, Laban, it's more about being aware of how powerful emotions in the workplace can be, but also, you know, being a caring person and genuinely caring about other people. You asked before, where have you learned things, and you learn things all the way along. And you know, probably the biggest thing I've learned from my wife are two things: comparing her to that manager I talked about before, Peter Garty, about caring about people and being genuinely interested in people. And I've watched over the years when my wife has talked to other people, because she asks questions like no one else can, and you wouldn't believe what people tell her, because she is genuinely interested. And people, people latch onto that, you know, and they trust and they want to tell. She'll get annoyed sometimes because then she won't get the same thing reciprocated to her. But you know, I always say to her, I always say, look, you don't understand how powerful that gift you've got of asking all these questions in such a genuine way, you know. And you know, she's very generous with her time, and she'll talk to anyone. And I think she gets the reward for that from the way people open up. Sometimes it's exhausting because they open up about stuff that that perhaps is quite confronting. There was another one I was going to mention too. Oh, the other thing from her is about communication, because she's an ex-journalist and she was press secretary and went into PR. Did that kind of work. Now she's a writer and editor. But talking to her about communication and how to communicate and different ideas of communication, both in the way she is personally, but also in her professional capacity, has been absolutely invaluable, because you know, I would have missed so much by communicating the way I thought it should be communicated, rather than putting myself in the shoes of the people being communicated to.
It's so important, Paul. And I spoke to Sir Steve Hansen about this and the power of vulnerability. And anyone that's read anything by Brené Brown and knows her story will know, you know, how she got up on a TED talk, shared how she'd had a breakdown and had troubles with alcohol.
Yeah.
And then wanted to get the video taken down the next day. And it didn't get taken down because it had been distributed already, and ended up transforming her life and affected probably, well, it would be over millions and millions of people now. And it's something that I've absolutely taken on board in the last 5 years in my own journey, Paul. Like,
yeah.
And I think, you know, in the process of giving up drinking and drugs and gambling and sex and philandrophy, like all of those things, they stoked my ego for a long time. And now you know, I'm not perfect, God, far from it, but it's allowed me to be interested in other people. And I always have been, but you know, and particularly this platform has taught me to listen way more, particularly being a speaker and just witnessing firsthand, because I'm so comfortable now with all of my demons. I share them in the right environment and very brazen about them too. And the like your wife, you know, the people that open up and share things with you as well, through the power of storytelling. You know, there's a physical response. There's a dopamine and oxytocin and serotonin response that happens physically. And when that happens, you become more bonded and closer to the other person. And when you feel bonded and more close, you are way more likely to open up and get a much better response. So from a leadership point of view, it's brilliant.
Yeah. Yeah.
So as CEO of New Zealand Ski, which you're in charge of Mt Hutt, the Remarkables, Coronet Peak.
Correct.
Anyone else?
No, that's our portfolio.
It's not a bad couple of mountains, 3 mountains.
Yeah.
How has your leadership style changed since 2013 to now?
That's a great question. I think it's matured. You know, it's been in a role where, as I said before, you need to appreciate the diversity that's required to operate in an organisation like this, right? So I can bring all those core hard skills, if you like, around finance, and I've learned a bit about marketing and what it takes to make the mountains tick. But it's the soft skills around harnessing a purpose for everyone to latch onto and pointing everyone in the same direction. And I don't mean, you know, providing lifts to the top of the mountain or buses up there. That's all that's fine. You can, robots can do that. But it's sharing something in terms of a passion, in terms of a purpose. I guess the one thing that really struck a chord with me was sorry, his name just escapes me. Simon Sinek. You would have watched some of Simon's stuff, and when he does the TED talk on creating purpose, and
finding your
when
why.
I was at your why, right? And when I was at Christchurch City Council, right? So I bought Balanced Scorecard into Christchurch City Council, and the piece that was missing for us there was the why. And when I came into NZ Ski, we had a lot of those mechanical pieces in place from the former CEO. So I could actually focus on getting this team focused on what really drives us, and going. It's almost like a hierarchy of needs. What is the top of that tree? Because providing buses and food and lift passes and ski rental, that's sure ain't the top of the pile. The top of the pile for us is sharing our passion for snow sports and for the environments we work in with as many people as we possibly can. And you can see it every day. You go to our mountains and the faces of the lift operators as they put people on lifts, the ski instructors as they're teaching people and watching them progress, parents who are taking their kids up there and getting them on snow and seeing people have this fun and develop this passion. That's really what we're about. And for me, I think the big learning in this role, I always knew it needed to be done, but that's where I've taken myself to. I'm going, I don't need to be too focused on the metrics of this business anymore. What I need to be focused on is the passion and the drive, and just make sure everything's always pointed at that and driven by that. Yeah, that's where I've shifted my leadership, I guess. The other big thing I mentioned before, that I tend to put on my rose-tinted glasses, and that's a weakness. And it was something that struck me. I did a 360-degree feedback in my role at Telecom. So this is quite a long time ago, maybe 15 years ago. And one of the bits of feedback I got was I didn't deal with poor performance fast enough. And I thought, oh. And I kind of gave myself the excuse that I don't deal with poor performance publicly, but I do in private. But if I was a little bit more honest with myself, maybe I would have said, no, I actually don't do it fast enough. And that has bitten me a few times, where I've ignored behaviours that haven't been constructive, and in some cases have been destructive to some of the teams. So that's one of the things I've really focused on in more recent years, is dealing with things quickly and honestly, and perhaps not worrying too much about it's not offending the person that you're providing the feedback to. It's just being empathetic to the way they're going to listen to the feedback and making sure they get it. Because if you don't, the behaviours perpetuate, and they can be very destructive. So yeah, that's been I hope a big shift, but one of those big work-ons, because I always like to think the best of everyone. So I never like to think anyone comes to work not wanting to do a great job, especially when they work for a company like this, where literally what we're doing every day is making people happy because we're delivering them to a mountain and connecting them to a passion.
Well, I tell you something, Paul, I at the end of 2019, because I had a crack at running my own recruitment business last year, because I've worked in IT recruitment for 14 years prior to this, and it didn't work. It was a total unmitigated disaster, and for a couple of reasons. And I use those words for effect only, because they ended up being the greatest blessing in disguise. But I took a 5-week contract working for a superannuation fund over here as a hired gun to help them with this big workload. And the they will never say that I was fired, but I was fired with 2 days to go because someone took offense to a conversation that happened in the cafeteria regarding me talking about diet and mental health having a link, right? And as I walked out of the building, and that was the feedback, someone took offense to you talking about the link between mental health and diet, which
Yeah.
if you get on any PubMed or any science paper, there's thousands of papers suggesting that there's a direct link. And having come through my own experience, I can tell you right now, it's 100% the truth, right? So, but I walked out of there a bit of a stunned mullet because I'm not used to being sacked. And it was a real dent to my ego, but it ended up being a massive blessing in disguise. And maybe with the benefit of hindsight, I wasn't doing the job that I was maybe employed to do because maybe I was distracted from my true passion, and it forced me into doing my true passion much faster. So for me, being sacked ended up being a huge gift.
Yeah.
And, you know, I think that, like, you know, what you're coming to terms with in the way that you are able to, you know, make a quicker decision and sacking someone for poor performance or whatever, you know, it's not about upsetting them. It's about really giving them an opportunity to move on to the next chapter of their life. So, you know, no one's perfect. You sound like you do things right. And, you know,
You know, and what the new leader of the National Party actually said a couple of days ago in an interview, you don't learn anything from your successes, but you learn a lot from your mistakes. And I think it's, you know, that's a lot of people should listen to that and just take that moment to reflect when something doesn't go quite right on what happened there, what could I have done differently. You know, there's so much of that below the line behavior in any business, and it's about pushing yourself above the line and asking yourself those more positive questions about what I could have done differently, rather than looking to blame and drop below the line and just, you know, flick it off to something else that you don't think you can have any impact on, because most likely you can.
Now, a bit of a change in topic, but it's something equally important. There's no Australians skiing on your mountains at the moment. Has that been a blessing in disguise?
From my revenue line, no. No, you know, I'd say no. Look, we love having the Australians in town. There's a real vibrancy that comes into Queenstown at this time of the year, with people from all over the world here, again, sharing a passion, whether it's a passion for coming up our mountains or just enjoying what's downtown in Queenstown. It's just cool, and we are missing it. So we're desperate to get it back, but I can't see it. You know, our planning is not that it'll happen anytime this year, sadly. And you know, COVID has just been another one of those challenges you grab with both hands and run with. There's been a few in my career now, so I kind of, you know, you get it. You know, 1 earthquake, 2 earthquakes in Christchurch. I was actually chair of the Christchurch Adventure Park a few years ago when we'd been operating for 6 weeks when the Port Hills fires in Christchurch wiped it out, and we had to rebuild a brand new business. And now COVID, which is a more worldwide thing. So if there's something that I will say, it's that shit does happen, and you need to be ready for it. I actually came back after my mother's funeral. My mum died on the 29th of February, had about a week in Christchurch with my family, and I could see this COVID thing developing overseas. And I came back and sat down with my senior team here. I said, what are you thinking about this COVID thing? And they really hadn't switched their minds into it at that stage. And I said, guys, it's coming. We need to actually start to plan for it now, and be ready, because, and back then the worry was a depressed demand, but that was really the least of our worry. So, but at least we started to really think about it. And I think that experience in dealing with the earthquakes in Christchurch equipped me far better for preparing my team to face this, or helping them be ready for it. Because of course then we went into lockdown, and it was far more back to the response to the earthquakes. And I did notice, and I talked to them actually about how my leadership had changed, because during that time, what they wanted was fast decisions and fast direction. We didn't really have time for consensus building, and I apologized a few times for being more autocratic than what I want to be as a leader. But the feedback I was getting was, no, it's fine. It's fine. We just want to know. We just want to know. We just want to get on with it. And I think we did well as a business preparing ourselves for every eventuality. I was sick of talking about scenarios, but it was certainly worth doing. Certainly sorry from a finance manager who had to keep on tumbling those scenarios.
Well, what's next for CEO Paul Anderson? What other aspirations and goals in life do you have that you haven't ticked off the list yet?
You probably start to think about, what's my legacy going to be, right? And I'm still pretty young. I've got plenty of years in front of me. But one of the things that really spins my wheel in this role is developing something on the ski areas that's going to be there for a long time. We've got a growing market, and once we get the Aussies back, we're going to be growing a lot more. And we've got some fantastic terrain that we want to develop out beyond the Remarkables. It's called the Doolins. That's it's a big, it's long term. It would be a step change to the Queenstown economy, so it really feeds more economic activity into our town. The other part of it is, I guess, building this business from being a 4-month-a-year business into being a 12-month-a-year business. So, expanding. And last year we kicked off a summer operation at Coronet Peak. Of course, with COVID coming along, we thought we might shelve that, but we're not going to. We want to keep that momentum going, because if we stop it, then we have to start from scratch again. So we're going to keep that going, and build, more employment, more opportunities, and more ways to share that environment. So that's what's spinning my wheels at the moment. I love being here. I love the lifestyle this industry provides me, and I love leading this team and working with the governance that I've got. So it ticks a lot of boxes. Where to after this job, I don't know. And I say that in all honesty. We talk about it a lot, but I'm very happy doing what I'm doing at the moment. And I've said to my chairman, as long as I'm adding value, I'm very happy to be here.
Well, for anyone that hasn't been to Queenstown or seen it on TV, it is ridiculous. It is ridiculous. It's the only way to describe it. I've been there many, many times, being from the South Island of New Zealand myself. I can probably foresee maybe the addiction or the allure of ending up staying and living in Queenstown. When we spoke to Steve Hansen, he was living down in Queenstown at the time, one of a few, no doubt. And I got some other friends of mine that live down there as well, and I can't ever see them going anywhere. And maybe there's. Have you ever heard of the sport tumbling, Paul?
No, what's that?
So it's downhill mountain running, but and it's I don't know what the longevity of any career in tumbling is, but it can't be very long because it's such a destructive sport. But maybe during the summer months, there's some opportunity to host the World Tumbling Champions there. Yeah.
Could well be. Any idea is a good idea.
Well, Queenstown, the capital of extreme sports in the world, as far as I'm aware.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, Paul, is there anything that you wanted to finish on before we wrap this up?
The main thing I'd say, one thing I haven't talked a lot about directly, but it probably has come through what I've said, is the concept of being values driven and being true to your values. And I mentioned that EQ work I did way back when, and one of the things I learned in that was that I wasn't very good at knowing how I felt. which sounds kind of crazy, but it's probably a bit the way Kiwi blokes are built, unfortunately, and it's a real weakness. I remember going through a restructure at Telecom one time, and I'd been told that I was okay and I was going to get this job, and my wife said to me, you know, you're really stressed out about this restructure, aren't you? And I said, no, why would I be? Because the logic part of my brain was saying, you're okay, you're not going to lose your job, therefore you should not be stressed. And therefore I was telling myself I was not stressed. But of course she knows my feelings better than anyone. She was saying, well, you are stressed, just admit it. And I was going, no, I'm not stressed, I'm not stressed. But and then I did this EQ work, and I went, I really don't understand what the hell's going on in my brain. And what was going on, I think, is the logic part of my brain was telling myself how I felt, regardless of how I actually felt. So it was about just letting go of it and just feeling what you feel. It sounds very touchy-feely, but
we love that on the show. Paul. We love that on the show.
But you know, you seriously do need to reflect on that and understand your own feelings before you can even start to be empathetic for other people. And yeah, I think you can read just about any decent leadership book will talk about the power of empathy and how important that is in leadership and true leadership. So for me, that was a really important thing for me to try and unlock. But just back to the values and the things that really drive me, and it's probably pretty simple. You know, it's and if I said two, it would be authenticity. So the ability to be yourself wherever you are, and that doesn't mean being, you know, being not empathetic. So you can't just be yourself if being yourself is not going to help get what you're trying to get across. I'm being a wee bit clumsy in the way I'm talking about that, but you know what I mean. You just can't be brutally honest if it's going to cause offence or whatever. So you've got to be yourself. You've got to be authentic.
I heard something the other day, Paul. Just to interrupt you, sorry.
Yeah.
That ties in with that beautifully. I can't remember the quote exactly, but it went along the lines of advice without a viable solution is abuse.
Yeah.
What do you think about that?
Right.
Just continue.
No, for sure. And the other value for me is respect. I did mention that earlier when I was talking about my mum particularly. So it's respect for others, and it's also, I think, a big driver for me is, you know, being liked is nice, but being respected is way more important. And when I know that's one of my core values, because when I see something that lacks respect, it really gets my back up. You know, you can feel that. You can feel yourself getting hot or flustered or whatever, and just like, you know, that's the thing that really drives me. So I think it's authenticity and respect are my two core values that I want to bring to my role, and just being straight up and doing everything I can to bring out the best in other people.
Well, Paul, I must say, I didn't really know what to expect coming into this, but you've exceeded my expectations by a country mile, and it's been an absolute delight. Thank you for sharing your story with us today on the Become Your Own Superhero show. If you are in New Zealand, get down to Coronet Peak, the Remarkables, or Mt Hutt immediately. They are
absolutely
phenomenal ski slopes, and the staff there are, from first-hand experience, they are phenomenal. Everyone's incredibly passionate. The Kias will rip the wiper blades off your car in the car park, so just keep an eye out for that. But I must say, thank you so much for your time, Paul, and thank you so much. It's been
my pleasure, Laban. Great to meet you by meet you, and looking forward to having a beer when you can get over here.